Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pakzan Dastur, and I lead the research and diligence teams at Dasra. Kaku has told us a little bit about the research and has very kindly spoken about Dasra being part of it. And we wanted to actually share a little bit of our experiences with you and what some of that report holds in store for you. So a quick question before I start off is how many of us have seen either children or men squatting at the railway tracks or on the side of the roads in Mumbai when we're traveling? Okay, so nearly all of us. And our most likely reaction is to kind of cover our noses and look away. But have we ever stopped to give a thought to why we never or rarely see any girls or women squatting by the roadside, particularly adolescent girls? And that's because just as hard it is for the children and the men to be squatting outside, it is not even an option for the girls. For a girl living in India, a simple thing like finding a place to defecate is a daily struggle. If she doesn't have a toilet at home, she has to walk at least 20 minutes to a community toilet, which probably has broken windows, might not even have a door, might have no water facilities, which means that she has to actually carry buckets of water from her home to that community toilet, not to talk about the long winding queues in which she has to stand before she even gets a chance to access that dysfunctional toilet. So not having any option, what does she do next? She then goes and tries to find either a patch of land or some shrubbery or some trees behind which she can do her business. And because she will then have men or boys leching at her, or passing lewd comments, or even at times physically assaulting her, she has to do this either before dawn or after nightfall, which means that a girl in India, on average, is holding her bladder for 13 hours a day. If we were to just think about the number of times that we need to access the loo and then juxtapose it with this number, it's quite astonishing. And then if we look at the girl growing up and starting to menstruate, going to a school where there are no toilets, she has to skip those 5 days of school, which means ultimately falling behind the class, where we have 23% girls ultimately dropping out of the school system itself. Out of the 120 million adolescent girls in India today, this is the story of 63 million adolescent girls. They are not able to access education or have healthy lives for themselves or for their children, just for lack of a simple toilet. Which brings me to the brighter side of things. And since we are all corporates here, to talk about something that we understand very well, which is ROI. And coming to sanitation, sanitation is actually the greatest return on investment in the development sector. For every $1 that we put in, we can get as much as $34 back in health, education, and economic development of the girl child. So having that in mind, we went out and for the past 8 to 10 months with the Bank of America team, found evidence on the ground to say that there are clear strategies that can create impact on the ground. One is prioritizing toilets in homes instead of communities. Second is investing in school-based sanitation. Third, partnering with girls to identify solutions for them. And fourth is really breaking the secrecy around menstrual hygiene and management and just talking more about it. These strategies have proven to change lives for girls on the ground. And what is most exciting for both Bank of America and DASRA is that there are solid nonprofit organizations on the ground doing this work every day. NGOs such as Shelter, Vatsalya, Nidan, CFAR, MHT are doing some amazing work on the ground. And if you were to look at the report, part 2 of it captures some of their models, approaches, and impact. But ultimately, reports don't change the world. Champions do. And we're extremely proud and grateful and privileged to have a champion in Bank of America. For the past 10 to 12 months, the team at BOA has been extremely engaged and proactive and really strategic, right from deciding where they want to put their weight behind, to bringing the core skills of banking to the table, research, analysis, meaningful questioning, both to the NGOs and DASRA, to meeting with the NGOs one-on-one, understanding their approaches, understanding their impact, really trying to understand their funding needs. And ultimately, like Kaku said, putting the money where their mouth is to be ultimately funding some of these organizations in multi-year grants, which is a great start. And all of this, again, has been possible because of the unwavering leadership of Kaku, who has not only very generously lent her team to partner with us, but even her voice to the cause of the adolescent girl. And of course, our other 2 champions right here on stage and also in the audience are the NGOs who do this work day in and day out untiringly. And so I would like to thank you all for your commitment to this issue. And we're very, very proud to be associated with you. With that, we'll start the panel. Thanks, Mandar. Okay, so we have exactly 30 minutes, and I have people here who are showing me placards, so we're going to be right on the dot. I'm going to start off both with Neelam and Pratima first, and then come to you, Kaku. But Neelam, you're a doctor, and Pratima, you're an architect, so that's very interesting. Neelam, if you could talk to a little bit about your journey, very briefly, about being a doctor, and then moving into founding Vatsalya and the journey of that, but also a little bit to why sanitation. Why do you think that's a root cause that you would want to address through your work?
Thanks, Pakzan. I think this is very interesting journey which I've been through. I'm an obstetrician by training, and I was deeply into my practice when I realized that there are a lot of families which are coming to me asking for sex determination test, and they do not want a girl. By that, I'm talking about 90s when this technology, mainly ultrasound, came in the country. So I was very upset with this. So I founded this organization, Vatsalya, in way back 95, and I started working for this issue that, by then the act had also come in the country, Prenatal Diagnostic Technique Act, prohibition of misuse. So while I was working, I got to know with the communities when I was working why people ultimately don't want daughters, why there is so much of aversion to daughters. Then the answer was that girls are not valued. And they are not empowered to say, they are nowhere in the decision making. Then I thought that it's not enough that we are working against the technology and we are working towards medical fraternity. It's important that the girls be valued. And value doesn't come in a day. It takes time. It's a process. How the girls can be empowered. And empowerment, I think the education is the biggest tool to empower girls. And I realized that as right now, Pakistan said that 23% of the girls, they drop out of these schools because of the sanitation facilities are not there. Or many girls are not allowed once they start having their minarchy to their school because the schools are far off and they are unable to go to the secondary school. So I thought of that I should start working on these issues of menstruation. And once we started addressing menstruation, we realized that without sanitation, we cannot address issues of menstruation, hygiene and management. So that's how I ended up doing sanitation, and I feel that that is the gateway for adolescent girls to start negotiating for their rights, as we realize that there is a very growing concern that the sanitation now is being seen as human right. And somewhere I see that this is the gateway for sexual and reproductive rights for adolescent girls. So I feel that sanitation and girls, they are very closely linked, and we should work on sanitation, especially around girls, because they get a lot of problems of reproductive health if they are not using sanitary facilities during menstruation. Apart from that, if they are into habit of behavior change, of many other hygienic practices like washing hands, they're going to be mothers in future. And we all know that washing hands at critical times by the mother while she's handling the neonate can save them from a lot of morbidity and mortality, and it can save many neonates from mortality. So that's how, if we invest in sanitation for girls, I think there are multiple outputs and byproducts which we get as a result. So it's important to work on sanitation. So starting from the sex determination technology and working against it, I'm still working on that, but then I landed up for aspiration and value of girls, and that is how the sanitation came across during my course of work.
Thank you, Neelam. Pratima, if you could talk a little bit to the approach that Shelter takes of individual toilets, and a little bit of your journey of being an architect and then moving into the sanitation space would be really interesting for us to know.
Thank you, Pakzan. I would like to thank Dasra. I would like to thank Kaku for giving me this opportunity. I'm an architect by training, and I happen to do a master's program called Building Design for Developing Countries in the UK. And we had very eminent architects and planners teaching us on that course. You know, as an architect, as it is, ours is a very elitist profession. We hardly deal with the top 20% of the society. And when you move away from your country, there's a perspective that you get which you don't probably have when you're staying right there. So having gone through that course, I think that was the turning point in my life. I decided when I go back to my country, I would like to be working in the development sector. Of course, I had no clue how I was going to start doing that. But when I came back to India, I was working in an organization called Center for Development Studies and Activities, where I met two other fellow architects who shared the same vision, and we decided to start Shelter Associates. And the first thing we did, you know, we were architects, not social workers. We started working in slums. The first 2 years were very, very critical for us because we were sort of learning things hands-on. We weren't trained as social workers. We were professionals who were coming in and trying to understand and grasp the situation there. And what we saw was fairly horrifying, the kind of unequitable distribution of resources, the depravity in which people lived, and not having the most basic necessities like sanitation or water or electricity. And on the other hand, the government being absolutely clueless about how to plug in these gaps. And we realized that the government was clueless simply because they had absolutely no data on the ground which would inform decisions. And that is when we started something which we never thought we would be doing, because when we started off, we wanted to give them access to good services, we wanted to give them good housing, but we never thought mapping poverty would become such an important and integral part of our work. I remember when we started using the GIS software for mapping poverty very early, in the late 90s, and we managed to cover 2/3 of Pune slum. One of the things that surprised us was that even then, more than 80% of slum dwellers had individual water connection. Around 90% had electricity, but barely 20 to 22% had access to their own sanitation. So sanitation, and then subsequently as we started working in other cities, we realized that, of Maharashtra, we realized that it was a similar picture which kept coming up, that there was really a huge dearth of access to safe sanitation. And the way it impacted girls, adolescent girls and women, I think Dr. Singh has already spoken about it. So this is why we turned to sanitation in a big way. So the last 16 years, we have been working in the state of Maharashtra, in Pune, Sangli, now we are working in a few other cities. The first thing we put in place is data, because data can be very empowering, and it has actually demolished quite a few myths around sanitation, which I think I can elaborate as we go along.
Thank you, Pratima. So kind of moving on from Dr. Neelam that talked about outcomes. Pratima spoke a lot about data. To Kaku, I know something that you hold very dear to your heart, and that's impact. Throughout the process, you have been questioning the impact of investing in sanitation, the impact of sanitation for adolescent girls, and then when we came down to choosing nonprofits, to really seeing, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to make sure that there's an actual change on the ground? Could you comment a little bit on, your approach and your thinking around impact?
I would kind of say that when we were going through the process last year as a part of the CSR activity, of course at foundation level we've been doing this for years, and we've been looking at women, children, arts and culture, and different initiatives that are very dear to our firm and the communities where we want to impact. But last year, when we had to start deploying 2% of the CSR, we felt that we were in a mad rush to go ahead and lend to the organizations which we knew would put the money to work. But we realized that in the midst of doing that, and many of my other corporates doing that, we were actually increasing their cost because there were too many funds flowing into the NGOs, and for no fault of theirs, they had not planned that there's going to be so much money coming. That's when we decided that we would work on a research report. We'd go into the depth of analysis, and through the process, our main questioning, both to Dasara, thanks to all our bankers who do continuous due diligence in IPO mandates or M&A, or the interest that they have at the corporate banking level, we kept asking them, how are we going to see that the best use of money is made? How can we ensure that the costs are well measured? And how are we sure in the next 1 year or 12 months from now, what is the impact? And as we went through this process, it was a good learning for us, I would say, at the bank, to say that there's no simple answers as an IPO has, and there is a balance that one needs to maintain. And I'm sure they learned through the process as to how important, and we were not driving it for our own cause. We are trying to see how far is the impact which we can reach, and how can they scale up to the next level, so the drive continues to be transformational, and every year it's more exponential. So that's how we have tried. We have laid down parameters different with different NGOs, I would say Dr. Neelam has a great software, which on a no-name basis, I thought is a very fast and measured all the costs so effectively that every penny was actually accounted for, and it was very easy at any point of time for us to reach out to see what the impact she was creating. And similarly, when we sat with Pratima, I thought it was very interesting to know how city plans were made ahead of actually getting into sanitation, how the city mapping and how the costs of the pipelines were done, and how deep the costs actually reduced because it was an integrated approach. And we have worked out amongst ourselves, and hopefully we are all on a journey together where we come back and keep revising together as partners to take it to the next level.
So I'm going to put the question back to you based on a point that you spoke about. You said bringing in your banking skills, right? Could you talk a little bit more to that? Because we've seen through the journey with Bank of America, time and again, y'all falling back on data, y'all bringing your research expertise, the analysis. Could you talk a little bit of how corporates in the CSR space could bring their skills in addition to the funding that they're providing, and why that is important?
So I would say that since we had set out ourselves with an objective, and we had one clear objective of funding this sector and adolescent girls, I think where the team brought in a lot of sense was having those discussions, visiting the places, seeing how we could really see where the cost leakages were. It's a third-party view, frankly. It's about anybody coming and seeing my business will also find there are 3 better ways of doing something different. So it's also about contributing to it, because we at Bank of America clearly believe that it's not only about funding, but it's also volunteering. And volunteering is not just feet on street. This is how to really accelerate their model and how to bring the exponential growth that we are all talking about. And we were very satisfied as the progress most of them had made. And I'm quite sure that through the journey, these skill sets will be continuous. So our bankers have taken up each of the NGOs for them to monitor. And they will also work with volunteers who will work with the NGOs, and we can bring in different sets, whether financial, due diligence, money spent, all of this which come naturally to us.
Thank you. So kind of taking on from there, we're seeing an increase in the number of corporates who are coming in with this mindset, saying, how do I bring more than just funding to the table? How can we use our core competencies to the table and make it more useful for the organization? So just wanted to bring in your thoughts on, how do you see these partnerships? What do you see as the role of corporates with the new CSR law? And any examples, obviously, with or without names, but what has really helped you or not? Dr. Neelam first.
I think it's, we are in a very complementary role, because this sector may have some core competencies, like we are good at mobilizing communities and engaging with the communities, because that is a process that takes time. And I remember very clearly when I was having a conversation with Kagu in the first place, it was difficult for me to really convince her that why are we investing so much of money in community engagement. But later on, I'm happy that now she's so convinced with it. So I think that is the core competency which we people who work on the ground has. But there are issues like they said that there are people who have other competencies like HR management, maybe financial management, and calculating and playing with data, they are very good at. So I think those competencies we will definitely like to pitch in, and so that we really, we are in a complementary role to each other, and we learn a lot from them, and maybe the process we go through and we engage with communities. And it has been since morning I've been hearing that the government has weakness of, because you know, they everything they take as hardware is all ready because it comes with money, but software is really difficult because it is very time engaging and intensive and energy intensive. So even government can come in as a, we can create an evidence together to showcase the government that look, this is scalable and this is doable, so that government also learns with this journey. So I think these are very complementary roles which we are going to play in future.
And that's actually a great segue for my question to you, Pratima, because I wanted to add on the government piece. I know that you work significantly with the government in Pune and in parts of Maharashtra, and then you have corporates also coming to the table. How does this whole ecosystem work? Again, what is the role of government? How can all these three entities, whether it's the non-profit, the corporate, and the government, play, like Dr. Neelam Singh said, complementary roles to each other?
Before coming to the government, I would also like to thank Bank of America, because one area which nobody wants to ever fund is data. And it was, and I believe that's the foundation for every project. If you don't know the slum well, if you don't know where the lines are running, if you don't know how many people, which are the exact families who are defecating in the open or using a community toilet or have their own individual toilet, you are never ever going to be able to target the families in any community realistically. And often, what brings in the most transparency and accountability in a process is what people don't want to fund, because most of the corporates have always wanted to fund the toilets, and the percentage funding is always like, how many toilets can you give us? Can you get the data funding from someone else? I mean, this is how they always start off. We have a process which is very robust when we collect data, and it requires a lot of skilled people who work on it. We gather data on the ground using tablets. We have a back-end management team which looks at all the GIS integration and putting it out on the web-based platform. I'm very happy to say that 2 cities have already linked their website to our website to make that data available to everyone. That's Pune and Kolhapur. And so when we came to Bank of America and we said, we really would like you to help us start work in a new city, and the first thing we would require is putting the data in place. And they have gone ahead, sanctioned that, and I'm really delighted that along with the actual building of the toilets, we also are going to be moving into a new city. The second thing I feel that corporates can really impact a lot is traceability, transparency, and accountability, because when we work on sanitation, we have to work with the government. There's absolutely no two ways about it, because this is within their ambit. So whenever we work with governments, we work very, very intensively on a day-to-day basis. And it is extremely challenging for an NGO to get the government to keep pace with the work that we are doing. Because in every slum, whenever we are delivering individual sanitation, there are sewerage networks which may be there, which may not be there. Like, for instance, in Kolhapur, wherever we are working, the government is also trying to keep pace by putting in the lines where they don't exist, or cleaning out the sewerage lines which are choked, or where the gradient is not right. So there is a very intensive involvement from both ends. And if we can have the corporates as the third partner who can be on this process, I think it would bring immense value to the table, because we are working in most of the cities, not under Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, but with corporate support, because a lot of cities where we are working have realized the merit of this methodology that we are adopting and are encouraging us to put in toilets with the corporate help. And I think if the corporates could take just that one step forward and say, okay, let's be part of this committee, where we all meet, say, once a week, once a month or once in 2 months, to review the project, to see where the bottlenecks are, and try and resolve them, in a timely manner. I really would welcome corporates to come together on those kind of issues.
Great, thanks. And I have been told that I have 2 minutes. So, concluding thoughts from you, Kaku, any advice? You have a room full of peers here that you think from your experience that they could benefit from.
I think it's any initiative on NGOs or any specific activity, I think needs more than one organization. It needs the ecosystem and more of us to participate, maybe on 10 different causes, if we want India to be a changing environment. And I would really, really request corporates that if you can help and give advice to NGOs, because you have the experience, you have the talent, you've seen scalability, and if we can help them through this path, I think we will be doing a lot of justice and the impact will be a lot more. And the final thing I learned along the report, which was pretty amazing, thanks to Dasra, was also spending money on awareness. We are all used to physical assets as bankers, but the amount of money which can spend on awareness to make the physical assets worthwhile is a point that needs to be considered well in advance. And I would like to thank all the NGOs we have partnered with for teaching us that, which we will take back to our banking too.
Great. With on that note of true partnership, of learning from each other, I would like to thank all 3 of you for being on this panel and being such committed champions for this cause. Thanks very much, and thank you for being such great listeners.